Hello, welcome back to another video. I'm going to do another real-time collaging video as you seem to like the last one I did. In case you missed it, I will link the other one I made in the description. I made this nice birdhouse collage, and hopefully in this video I also make something nice. I've got a nice plan. If I can execute that plan, I'll be happy. So I've made a mood board. I'll pop my mood board up on screen. It consists of pictures from Pinterest, from just Google Images, and a very rough sketch which I did. I will show you my original sketchings here. So I just filled a little page in my sketchbook, various different compositions. So I'm going to be doing a scene of a kitchen in the middle of baking some cookies, a cake or whatever. So it's gonna have a mixer, a rolling pin, some like cookie cutters, mixing bowl, a whisk, some eggs, bits and bobs like that. Couldn't really figure out the best composition. I couldn't decide if I wanted it this way round or this way round, but I thought this way round would be able to fit more, like I'd just be able to fit more on, so I went for that. And then I decided to do this is extremely rough, a sketch just on this random sheet of paper I had, and I quite like the composition of this, so I took a picture of it, took that into Photoshop, and then started adding some colours on Photoshop to figure out my colour palette. This way, when I come to the collaging stage, I have a bit more figured out and it should be easier because I know kind of what colours I'm working with, although it still will be quite tricky because it's figuring out the right shade of the colour and I might change from my plan, but at least I've got something to work from. So after I made that plan, I was like, okay, now I kind of know what colours I'm going to use. I started painting some paper. I already have loads of paper as is. I have two big folders full of paper and a big pile of paper that's just been living on my desk for a while. So I'll be using bits of paper which aren't just these. I would just paint a few extras because there's some very specific colours I wanted for this piece, which I'm not sure if I have already, or if I do have it, it won't be the right texture, or I won't have enough of it. So I just painted a bunch of different blues, mainly for the mixer, the jug and the tiles on the walls. And then I'm going to be using lots of like earthy brown tones. This is for the, I'm going to have it look like they're making gingerbread biscuits. So this will be the ginger biscuit dough. And I've tried to add like splatters of white to kind of look like flour. You know, when you're rolling out the dough, you put flour on it. This is for the tiles on the wall. That's just a random, potentially that might be nice for the roller, the rolling pin. More stuff for the tiles, and then I painted a few attempts. I'm not really sure if I like any of these, but I'll see what I can do. This is for the kitchen worktop. I wanted it to be a nice dark brown so that everything on top can contrast with a dark brown background, and then do lighter things on top as well. So these are all the papers I'll be using, as well as loads of other bits of paper from my collection of hundreds of bits of paper. So that gives you an idea of what we're working from. This is all just printer paper. It's painted with acrylic paint. If you would like to see how I paint my paper, I have quite a few videos showing that process. I think in this video where I made this cottage, how I collage part 2 or something like that, there's quite a big painting paper section in that, which will be linked in the description if you want more insight into how these bits of papers actually get painted, because it's quite a big part of the process. I painted 3 sheets to give myself options, although they all look pretty identical. I've got my mood board up in front of me, which I keep looking at to reference, because I was trying to do like dry brushing and stripes to look like wood, but sometimes you just can't really control where the paint goes and what the brush is doing. So, but I think this is the nicest one. So I'll cut out a little rectangle of this. I'll cut it out way too big and then I can trim it to size once I have a better idea of how it will look. When I have a big shape like this, I try to break it up into smaller shapes. I don't like it when I have too big of a shape that's like uninterrupted, I suppose. I just think it looks boring. If I chop into this, I thought it'd be good to film this one because all the other videos I've done where it's like a collage tutorial or a real-time collage video, it's all been landscapes, and all of those landscapes have been like quite green and included flowers. So I thought video, a bit of a different collage, because I do make different collages, but I just realised I've never really made a full-length video about them. I'm just thinking about how can I get these to join up in a way which looks interesting but not too busy to the point where it's distracting from all the stuff on top, because you've got to think like there's going to be so much on top of this that you're going to barely see it. So I want it to look a bit more interesting than just one block shape, but then not super busy where it's going to distract by what's on top. I wanted to quickly pop in whilst there's this little sped up bit here with a voiceover, just to mention, because I don't think I mentioned it, that this is September's Patreon print. If you like the look of it, I know you haven't seen the finished thing yet, but you will do in a bit, or you can just skip forward, and also it'll be in the thumbnail. You can pledge to the Little Snips tier on my Patreon page and you can get a print of it. The prints get sent out at the start of October, and that's all I have to say on that. So if you like this print, that's how to get it. Alright, so I think that's okay. Like I said, it's gonna get covered up with loads of stuff, so you're gonna not really see it. But I like how I've got a few little lines where you can see the different like colours of brown, but it's not super overpowering. Although I might, looking at my sketch, all of this is gonna get covered up by a bowl and a tea towel. So maybe it might be better off being that way round, because then that way you might at least see a little bit of this nice texture here. Next I'm going to move on to the tiles at the back, so they're going to be like an uneven checkerboard, I suppose, of pink and cream. Not pink, blue and cream. For the background though, it's going to have like the little white lines in between, so, but I don't actually want it to be white. I want it to be more like cream, so I need to put like a base of cream down first, which then my tiles go on top of. This is one of my folders of paper. This is where all my little bits of paper go. You can see I've got every colour under the sun. This is just built up from years of collaging. So I have this paper here, which I really like. I've mentioned it a few times in previous videos, but it's made from elephant poo. So that means there's loads of these lovely like little flakes. But this paper is really nice. And it's just a lovely off-white colour. So I'm thinking of doing something like that. Trimming it, and then let's just see what the blue, I don't know how big to do these tiles. This bit of brown, honestly I should have washed my hands before I did this. I will probably wash them at some point in this video, so at some point this mark of brown will just miraculously disappear. So let's try it with this shade of blue first. I don't really know how big to cut them. Let's just guess that size. Oh, actually I think it should probably be the lighter shade. Probably this shade here. When I was painting these blues, I tried to just do a bunch of different shades. That way I could decide properly when it comes to the actual collaging process. I don't know, that's probably too big, but so that's going to be sitting alongside this cream colour. I also painted this sheet of paper as well. Are they... I mean, they're extremely similar in colour. I think I'm going to go for this one. This is slightly more orange and that one's slightly more pink, so I'm going to go with this one. So they're going to be like little checkerboard. Okay, so I'm going to cut out lots of little squares, try and figure out what size I actually want them to be, and then I'll get back to you. Okay, now it's not looking like much at the minute. As I've learned over my years of collaging, it's gonna look quite bad for quite a long time until it eventually starts to look good, right kind of towards the end of the collage. I guess I'll just work on sticking these down, although I'm starting to think I've done them all too big, because I like there to be a decent gap at the side of the paper before the collage starts, and with this there won't be much of a gap, so I might just go in and make them all a bit smaller. Something like that. I've kind of tried to vary the tones, so you can see I've got like slightly darker and paler tiles, because I was thinking if I did them all in the exact same colour it'd look really boring. Okay, so as you can see, everything's been stuck down. I tried to make the tiles a little bit wonky, and I decided to have them, like, I've made them a bit off-centered so that these were kind of cut off and then cut off at the top. That way it looks a bit more, I don't know, natural, I suppose. And then I made a teapot, and that's going to sit around there in the scene. And next I'm going to move on to doing the mixer, the mixing, I don't know the official name, the stand mixer, is that the way it's called? In my sketch that I did, my colour mark, the stand mixer was more of like a purpley blue, whereas this is more of a blue, and I feel like it's not got enough contrast with the tiles. I mean, it kind of does, but I kind of want it to be more of a purpley blue as opposed to a blue. So what I can do, instead of trying to paint a completely new piece of paper, I've got a few different options here which I can try out. Option number one is just getting a pencil and just adding a bit of colour on top. When you're doing this with like a small shape, it doesn't really matter because you can't really see that much of the texture. But when you're doing it for a big shape, you can really see the pencil texture, and I don't really like the way that looks. And also when you put pencil on top, sometimes can catch in the light and it makes a piece of paper a little bit more shiny because it's got that layer of pencil on top of it. So if I can avoid that, I'll try to. So my other option is I can use a little bit of watercolour here, get a bit of purple. So I'll just create a big pool of purple, and then I'm just gonna do a nice little wash over the blue. Okay, so I don't know how noticeable this is on camera, but everything's now got a slight purple hint to it. Paper's still wet, so I'm just going to set that to the side and let it dry. I don't like, if I can avoid it, I try not to dry the paper with a hairdryer, because when I do that, because it is just printer paper, it goes really crinkly. So I try to let everything air dry. Sometimes I get impatient and I do use the hairdryer, but if I can avoid that, I do. If you let it air dry, I've found that it usually dries quite flat. Anyway, whilst I'm waiting, I am going to add a few little decorations to my little tiles here. Don't know how well this will look actually in real life, but in my head it looks nice. So I'm going to cut out little triangles like this, and then cut a little triangle out of the triangle. This is when the small scissors really help. And I'm just going to do that on the blue ones, and then the cream ones will have little flowers. So I was thinking something like that for the blue tiles. I don't know. Now I'm second guessing it. I won't stick it down, I'll just let it sit there for a while and then I'll decide later on if I want to stick it down. What I'm going to do with this mixer is I'm going to draw it first, because this is just a piece of tracing paper, because I want it to be like a really specific size to fit in this collage, and if I was to cut it out without like a template, it might end up being too big, too small, and I could put all this work into a stand mixer and then it's not the right size to fit in the piece. So when I have to do something which is a little bit more on the complicated side of a shape, or something which has to be a specific size for the piece, I will just use a bit of tracing paper, I'll draw it out, and then that way I have a guide for cutting out my shapes. And it takes a little bit of prep work, but it makes things quicker in the long run, because you don't have to, you know, you don't have to cut out 10 different shapes which are all slightly too small or too big or not the right size. So just draw it first, it's easier in the long run. I'm going to have it in open mode, like with the thing tipped up. So I want it to kind of peek out the top of these tiles. I like when there's things inside the collage that like pop outside of the frame. Going to block out the big shapes first, and then I can worry about the detail afterwards, but it'd be something like, I'll maybe make that a bit wider. And also what's good about the tracing paper is, I mean, this shape's quite a simple one, but if I'm doing it for like an animal, it can get quite complicated with the shapes that I need to cut out. So it's really handy with the tracing paper because it's see-through. You can then bring your paper that you want to cut it out from, and then you can lay it on top and figure out which bit of the paper looks best inside this little shape. So especially with an animal where I need like a specific fur texture, it's good to use the tracing paper, find what's the best texture through the lens of the tracing paper, and then cut it out. It really helps with that. Not so much for this because it'll just be like a solid block of blue, but if it's a shape that I'm cutting out which needs various textures and colours in that one shape, it can be really handy. Alright, I've drawn my mixer and I've cut it out. I've not cut out this middle bit, but it doesn't matter. I'm pretty happy with its size, although I feel like it could be the tiniest little bit bigger. So what I'm going to do when I'm cutting out these shapes is I'm just going to cut them all out like a tiny bit bigger. Has this piece of paper dried? Near enough. It's dry enough to cut. First off, I'm going to hold this piece of paper against the tiles and make sure that the colours actually pop on top of the background. You don't want to like collage something and then realise you put it on top of the background and it just blends in too much. I need to make sure it's a different enough shade of blue to stand out against these tiles, which I think it is. Then what I'm going to do actually is I'm just going to cut this top bit off, because that's all I'm really cutting out at the moment. Right, so as you can see, my template has been cut up quite a bit into different parts. Oh, that went that way around. There you go. And all of that was to cut out all these very specific shapes which needed to fit inside each other and be this, this exact size. So the tracing paper is really good for that. I don't want to stick it down though, because I like to have the freedom once I've made the thing to be able to slightly move it around. Plus I'm probably going to be doing things to the tiles underneath. So I don't really want to stick this down yet, but I would like to make this so I have it as one piece. So what I'm going to do for that is I'm just going to take some scrap bits of paper that I've got, stick it to the scrap pieces of paper, so I've got like a scaffolding underneath the piece to actually hold it all together. Okay, so that gives me a loose idea of what it'll look like. I've not properly stuck this down because I might end up cutting that off and readjusting the angle, but it's just a loose way to keep it there for now. Okay, so I've done a few little bits since I last recorded. Mainly, I've made this bowl just from, I think this is 4 different shapes. A base shape, a little side shape, a circle, and then a little rim on the top there. I don't know if you saw me adding these final finishing touches to the mixer as well. And that's going to sit there with the whisk. That's going to sit around there. And then I've got some pieces here for another bowl. Sits around there. I'm trying to make, I'll pop an image of the kind of bowl I'm going for. And then I've cut out this shape here, which will be the gingerbread dough. So I'm just going to get my reference up on the screen in front of me. Well, first off, I think I might just rip the edges of this to make it a bit softer. It needs to look like rolled out dough. So that's my rolled out dough. I'm gonna, where have I put my little scissors? Take my little scissors and cut out some hearts. So it'll look like that. Cut out a couple more, maybe just one more. Which way should it face? Let's go this way. Save these cutouts and they can go like that, like they've been cut out from it. And then I was thinking about working on a rolling pin, and I found this big piece of paper. I'm not sure how much I like it though, but I do like the lines on it, but it's not quite the right colour, so I might have to bring over the old watercolour trick again, just to make it a little bit warmer. It's a little bit on the cool side and it's too pale at the moment. I'd like it to be a bit darker and a bit warmer to fit in more with the scene. Grabbing a bit of paint from this side of the palette that I already had there. I'm going to let that dry and I'll come back to it. I'm going to get this is my Neocolor crayons. I use these quite a lot in collages to add extra details. I want this to look a little bit like, obviously when you're rolling out dough there's flour on it, so I'm just going to add a bit more white. I did try to add like I don't know if you can tell, speckled texture on this, which I did when I was making the textures. I used a sponge, dipped it in some white paint, like watered down white paint, and sponged that on top to add this kind of speckled gradient look, but it's not quite as pale as I'd like it to be, so I'm just gonna use this as well. And then I might actually at some point grab that sponge, if I'm brave enough. I don't know, it might end up ruining the piece. I'd like there to be flour on here, so I'm gonna get that sponge and dab some white bits on top of this countertop. I need to make a baking. Let me find the right colour for that. I've painted this. I've changed the camera angle here just because it's getting to the small stuff now. I painted this just with watercolour, added some stripes. This is that elephant poo paper. I think it looks really cute. I'm trying to recreate this flower packet. I'm going to recreate that. So I've already cut out my shapes just to save the time, because this video is getting, I imagine will be getting quite long. So I'm going to do a little banner up here. And then I'm going to try and draw do some writing inside of that. I'll use my white pencil and I will try to write the word flower inside. I will have to simplify this design down a lot because there's only so much you can do with paper, especially when it's this small. So I'm simplifying the actual flower packet down to just a few shapes, but I think I've managed to simplify it down to the key shape so that it's still recognisable as that flower packet. So I add a little white box on here, and then I'm going to add a tiny little cupcake and banner on top. I'm also going to try and write words inside this tiny little blue banner, light blue banner, but that is going to be extremely fiddly. It might be something that if it goes badly, I will fix in Photoshop and then write on top of it on Photoshop, because it might be getting to the point where it's too fiddly and small to do in real life. And then the top of the cupcake, I'll add lines on this cupcake holder. I don't know what they're called, the paper cupcake holder thing. I'll try this white pencil, but I don't know how well it will turn up. It's not the best white pencil, this, but you know what, that's fine. You can see the lines all right. Alright, so I've finished off these two flour and sugar bags. So this was watercolour, the white was a little bit of gouache, and basically I went in with a bit more watercolour, just on the edges to add a bit of shading just to discolour it a bit. So I might actually emphasise that a bit because it's dried a bit lighter than I wanted it to. So I might just re-shade those a little bit. So I'm just going to spend some time now figuring out what arrangement I want everything to go in, and then it's like finishing touches. This is going to be a block of chocolate. I need to add little squares inside my square, and then once I've got everything stuck down, it'll give me a better idea of the gaps I need to fill and what colours I need to use for those gaps. I've been adding just some finishing touches. I added this little jug. I went in with a pencil and added in more like wood grain to the background texture. Now I'm going in with the finishing touches. Originally I was going to draw some like flowers on these tiles, but I think because this scene is already quite busy, if I add more busyness to the back, it's just going to be way too much. So instead, I'm just going to add, because I do feel like it needs something, I'm just going to add some very simple little diamonds to finish off the piece, and that I think will be it. I might add a bit more coloured pencil to a few areas. So I don't know whether to add them to all tiles. Should I add it to this one here? So I've peeled up my teapot and I can just squeeze that in underneath. Oh, I might have to do a bit of peeling up of this shape as well. Then I just go in with the coloured pencil and add a bit more shading. Bit of shade into this one as well. Bit of a scribble. I like a scribble. And just add a few scribbles to this stand mixer, because again, that's looking a bit too perfect for my liking. Need to add some fun little scribbles. Finishing touch as well, as I need to go round and properly glue everything down. As you can see, I've still got quite a few bits that aren't properly glued down. So I've got to take some time to actually glue everything down as well as I can. And then the next thing you'll see are some finishing as shots of the finished thing. So here's some finishing shots of the piece. This is it, a lot more accurate to what it actually looks like in real life. Throughout this video, the footage being filmed was made it look a lot like yellower and more dull than it actually looked in real life. And then the final bit, the final picture you'll see of it right at the end is the print of it, after it had been scanned in and edited to look a little bit brighter. And a lot more accurate to what it looks like in real life. So this final kind of print version is as close to I can get it to looking like the real thing as possible. So if you like the look of this, like I mentioned before, pledge to the little snips here on my Patreon page and you can get a print of this in the post. Alright, thank you very much for watching and I'll see you soon. Bye!